Welcome to Wellness Radio with Dr. Jeanette Gallagher as your host. Her show discusses topics of health, wellness, and spirituality, and is about discovering your place in this great universe from your cells to the cosmos. Along with her guests, in casual conversation, she strives to ask the difficult questions that may be holding you back from a vibrant life, and shares new ideas that may inspire you to make a change in your life that you only can see in your dreams. And now, here is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Wellness Radio. This is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher, and it's a pleasure to have you with us here this evening. Tonight we are going to be talking about end of life, hospice, palliative care, geriatric care, and the time of life when we are, as I call it, in our sunset years. Our sunset years are not always those years over the age of 70. They can be over the age of 40, over the age of 20. They could be at any time in our life. It is a time when we feel that our body, our vehicle, that which houses our spirit and our soul, is now saying, I'm a little bit on my wax and waning time. I'm a little bit tired. I've had a little bit too much that I'm carrying, and now it's time for me to say, it's time to just let it go. And that is the time we are going to be talking about today. My guest today is Linda Moran. Her book is The Perks of Hospice, Stories of Love, Life, and Loss. And what we'll really be talking about is prompting the questions, the inspiration, the hopes, the beliefs, and the truths, so that when you're in that process, you'll say, I've heard it before. Oh, I know what I need to do. Oh, I know I've seen this before, and I too can make it through. Linda, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you with us here this evening.
Oh, I'm so excited to have this chat. It's just a wonderful opportunity, so I thank you very much.
So glad to have you. I think so many times people will say, it's going to be one of those drag-me-down conversations. And just as you and I have shared prior to this call when we were talking, this is far from that. This is a time to find out when you really can connect with each other on a soul and a spirit level, and are you willing to take advantage of the moment in time? Don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's so much we can do to prepare for what we don't want to think about, so that when that moment comes, when that time comes, you have a selection of things that you know that you can do. You can advocate, which I think is so critical. You can have prepared things ahead of time, like lists of medications, family members, phone numbers, things that you don't have to worry about carrying around in your head. And I one of the women I had talked to said, well, I hope I don't need your book for a very long time. And I said, well, you need it now because it can help you with some preparation. There's some things in there that you can think about that will make the end of life so much, dare I use the word, better for you. And
I think it's with ease, don't you think, with ease?
Yes. And my husband was not about to give up the fight. He is what I refer to as a stubborn Yankee. And it's just our 3 weeks in respite house, just watching every day, there was less and less of him, and just saying to him, it's okay. You're tired. It's okay. But he just did not want to let go. He was worried for me, and we had talked about that. But he just did not want to let go, and he didn't need to experience that suffering because we had talked about all of those things. And, we made decisions together, and we both were ready, as much as you can be, for the letting go that was going to need to happen.
I think about the word hospice all the time. I've worked in hospice many, many decades ago. I work with patients right now at end of life. I work with people in their spirituality and their soul time and the transition. And I really say to them all the time, the word hospice to me is help. I don't think of it as any other things. It's another person, another vehicle to ask the questions or bounce something off. That's what I think of it as, So many times, let's take a step back, Linda, as we really want to think of the time when we have a diagnosis. Something happens. We have an illness or we have an event. That's when the shift occurs. In other words, we no longer are free falling down the highway, so to speak. We are now within a restricted lane, and things are closing in on us. And when things are closing in on us, the answer is we no longer can, quote, think out of the box. We kind of do need to stay within the lines to be able to guide yourself through. And I think it is that way. Let's go to that point, like with your husband, about when he had his event and his heart and his health and things started to change. When we have that happen, I always say to patients, the very first thing when they're talking and they're saying what has happened to them in the past and they're coming to me, I'll say, that's awesome. And they're like, what? I'll say, because it brought you here to pay attention to that which the time you have left. Now, what would you like to do? And I think that on the time that I'm speaking, there's two divergent roads. The road that I'm sharing about and the road in which you've shared in your book is the one of asking questions and doing this and doing that and all that. So there are two roads. It's just that they are kind of parallel roads, perhaps?
Yeah, I can see what you're getting at. I think people tend to think with a diagnosis, or if they even hear the word hospice, just to them it means, oh, God, death. I can't deal with this too soon. And I know my husband was, as he put it, it was like a punch in the gut. But as we came to see, especially within the first couple of weeks, was that we were embraced by this incredible group of people who changed our minds about everything and gave us hope that however we wanted to spend our last time together, we would be able to do that. And that's so different from the road that most people end up taking with just continually going to doctors because doctors want to fix stuff, but there's times when they can't. And we were just so blessed. And there are times when I think, well, I realized that our situation of 2 years in hospice really was an outlier because, when you get the prognosis or the diagnosis of, 6 months or less, we ended up having two extra wedding anniversaries as a result of our care and stuff. And that's tremendous. That's tremendous. Yes.
Let's step back for a minute, Linda. We think about the idea is that once we have a diagnosis of what's going on in our life, and all of a sudden now we need to start going to doctors or going to the hospital or whatever it is, I've always said the greatest gift to give anyone is a book. You could find them like at bookstores or at Michael's or some of those places or even Walmart. It's just a bound book with a lot of blank pages in it. And you say, start to write your story now. Ask the question, write everything that comes to your mind and start writing things down. And I think what your book, truly The Perks of Hospice, is exactly that. It's giving you some of the answers that you've experienced. However, when others are going through it, they really need a book to start writing that, don't you think?
I think so. And one of the things in the literature that I read, Rabbi Steve Leder wrote The Beauty of What Remains, and his emphasis in going and talking to families right after death, is he walks in and says, tell me the stories. Tell me the stories. And I thought that was eye-opening, and realized that as we lose people around us of the same age, we've lost those stories, that now we are just the repository of them. But if they're in a journal, that's another place. So I think I started writing stuff down at the beginning of when things really started going wrong, just because I needed to keep track. I wanted to have a timeline in my head. And then it was like, well, I'm sorry, but you're not going to ignore me because I'm the woman here and you're a doctor from another continent. No, I'm the advocate. My husband cannot retain the information, so you are not going to ignore me. But then as a teacher, I also know that there are ways of going about that make people seem like it was their idea. I got really good at that with kids. But, saying to people, you could, instead of saying, well, why aren't you doing this? You could say something like, what advice would you give me? What do you think are side effects? Do you think this would help? Have you considered? And phrasing things that way, I think, helps to lower the barrier between you and the medical professional. That, especially if you're the advocate and your partner or whomever cannot respond for themselves. And my next door neighbor, who had taken her husband up to the hospital, said, I used one of those tricks. I used the trick about how to talk to the doctor so that I was getting clear on what I needed and what he saw that we needed.
I also, too, Linda, think that the advent of Google, so to speak, has really made a lot of the medical professionals very defensive. They don't like to be questioned. I mean, I've been in healthcare for over 5 decades. I've seen it. I know how it plays out. However, that does not give anyone, either side, the responsibility, nor the free-for-all, so to speak, to be able to go out and lash at the others when they don't know, are unaware, are not interested in, or perhaps it might not be the right alternative, to be taking that out on the other person. So I think what we have to remember is that once you have a diagnosis, the first thing you have to understand is that all of a sudden there's this antenna that comes up on your head, your patient's head, your advocate's head, your loved one's head, and the doctor's head, and it's beaming and it's saying, whoa, I'm putting up my protection wall. Now what do I need to know from here? And I think that's so vitally important because it will just take you out. Just as you shared in your book about getting an appointment, and the lady said like 3 weeks or whatever later, I thought it's so important. Even myself, I will call for an appointment somewhere, or whatever. And it's like, well, we have one for 6 months later. And it's like, okay, I'll take it, or whatever. And then one time I tried it and I said, well, let's just try something here. And I called up and I said, this is Dr. So-and-so, and I need an appointment for myself. Would you like to come in tomorrow? And I'm thinking, how denigrating to a patient, how denigrating to anyone to understand how the process works. Do you know what I mean? And it was just so wrong. But we do understand that there are, just as you said before, there are many different ways that this story is going to go. You just have to choose which one is best for you, perhaps?
Yes, and have an idea of what your choices are.
Yes,
I think
what the choices are, yes.
That's a key. Like, depending on your nurses who are so overworked and so wonderful and are there for you and will spend time with you. And then you have the office schedulers who know exactly what it is that they have to do, and that's what they're expected, and they cannot vary from that at all, which builds that frustration of, oh my God, we've got to wait 2 months to be able to deal with this.
Yes.
But knowing that you do have choices, like I found that asking for the triage nurse, and the immediate question was, well, why do you want to see her? Or why do you want to talk to her? And my response was, I think she needs to hear medically what it is I'm talking about. Well, I'll see if she's available. And invariably, if you work, if you're sympathetic, if you listen, if you present the facts, invariably you can get an earlier appointment. But office staff, while they have a vital job, it's not to try to get you in as soon as possible. It's to look and see what's available. So you need the option of maybe a triage nurse or something else. And I think options are just something we don't feel we have in healthcare these days.
Don't you think it's a loss of power because you now feel like you're a victim of the system, you're a victim of the disease, you're a victim of whatever, and we kind of hold on to that and we get stuck in that. Because just as you shared about the scheduling, and my story as well, I sometimes will say, I understand that you're the person who is answering the phone, and you have limits to what's available to you, is there anyone else that may be able to, just as you share the triage nurse, I'll say, is there anyone else within the office that would be able to take a message and relay it to either a supervisor or the doctor and get back to me? Because what we have to remember is that there are many jobs within companies, corporations, even in your doctor's office and in the hospital. There are many jobs that are very tiered. You know, there's someone that's you're going to hit someone at the front desk. You're going to hit someone on the back office. You're going to hit someone that goes in with the doctor. You're going to hit someone who's just scribing for the doctor. And then you might hit, a DO or a PA or a nurse practitioner. And then you might get to the doctor. So these are all of these different tiers in which you'd be able to know how to navigate, right?
Right. And still maintain
your sanity.
Yes, and not getting angry. I've learned, I've had to really work on that. And I find every now and then when I'm talking with people about the whole medical issue at the beginning of the book, the more I talk about it, the angrier I get. And as you put it, I need to let that go because it's not helping anyone. But I know there are thousands of people out there who are going through that and all the issues that come with modern healthcare. And we need to feel that we have some sense of control. I know a lot of people went to medical school, they're the doctor, I'm going to do what they say. But maybe there are some other things that you could do, just like you said, with who else in the office might be available. And then one of the things I think you can do afterwards is write those thank you notes, because those people rarely get thanked. The LNAs, they come in, they do your baths, they rarely get thanked for what they've done. And I constantly wonder about the person in the bed next to you who is complaining and being miserable to the nurse, and I'm thinking, they're washing you and giving you shots, and this is how you're going to treat them? It's like, it's not going to help anybody. And how do you deal with the frustration? How do you be able to move past that? And I think just having little things that you can do, like, what did you say your name was? Okay. Or what medication tell me about the side effects. What should we be looking for? If you know that you can do those little things, it's something that you can hang on to.
Let's talk, Linda, for a second about emotions and feelings that come up. The idea, very first thing that comes up is safety and security. I'm no longer going to be here. My life is now short. Safety and security. They are going to do things to me that I'm not comfortable with. We think about comfort and being able to accept what's going on. Just as you shared about the person in the other bed, they may not have a safety and security buffer. They may not have anyone that's able to help them. They don't feel compassion, or they're not getting compassion, or whatever it might be. So everybody is really on full tilt. In this profession, everyone is on full tilt. If you don't have a buffer of some sort of speak or a way to be able to walk through your days, you are going to be also affected. So I think the idea is that just as we look at post-pandemic, everybody has truly been taking a hit on when we are ill, when we are at the end of life, we are having life-changing health challenges. How or what is the first emotion and feeling that comes up for you, and how do you work through that? That's very important. I mean, right from the get-go right there, yes?
Yes. For my husband, it was anger. He wanted to live till at least 80, and he wasn't going to. And for me, it was absolute devastation of sorrow. He's going to be gone. I only have so much time left with him. And yes, we had almost 45 years, but I'm greedy. It wasn't enough. So, the sorrow, the anger, why can't the doctor fix this? It's really interesting. I read a really interesting book as a result of an article that was done on us for palliative care in Rwanda. And the article was about this doctor who had really begun to experiment and develop a really strong palliative care system. And some of the things that he referenced really resonated with me here, because a lot of times people aren't getting the message that they are really sick, that they are coming to the end of their life, because doctors don't know how to tell them that, or don't want to, or figure someone in the family will. And what this doctor wanted to do was develop a system, not for the patients, but for the care workers, on, as we collect information, how can we help the families understand what needs to be done, what their roles can be, what can the medical professionals do. And he based it on a lot of the mythology and cultural issues within Africa. And it was just tremendous, because it was help for the caregivers, that as they interviewed the whole family and found, like who was the lion or the lioness who could lead and help make the decisions, he based it on a set of 12 animals. The book is called The Safari Concept. And so if certain characteristics they saw in the interviews with the family came up, they were able to then look at their chart of animals and see, okay, this person is like a chimpanzee. Always chattering, always wanting to be involved, always willing to think outside the box, always willing to try something new. So we need to respect that when we're dealing with the families. And I just found that fascinating, because while there were some overlaps for medical care in this country with that, there were a whole bunch of really interesting ideas. So that was an interesting piece that came up just from, an interview for a newspaper in Africa, that I kept thinking about, I'm going to need to be culturally sensitive here, because I don't really know a lot about healthcare in Africa. And then to just find that there was this whole world opened up to me. And I think we don't need to Google everything, but we need to have an understanding of what's facing us and what we can possibly do. I'm not sure if that's making sense. I feel at this point like I might be rambling my thoughts.
No, but I also too think, Linda, it's very important to understand we are all in our sunset years at a certain point in our life. Okay? The idea is that, are we just waiting for the words to hear it out loud, to be able to say, oh, well, now, in other words, to give us the ability to say, well, I'm not going to do that anymore because. So now it's giving us a reason. Why? When I think of hospice and when I think of palliative care and I think of geriatric care, I think of it just as well as myself sitting here, at the age almost 70. I'm saying, oh, man, I'm going to go through that box of my stilettos in there. I'm going to let go 90% of them, but I'm going to keep the ones that I really like. And you know what? If I don't really like those, I'm going to order a new pair of pink ones with sequins on, because I really like them. So when I'm sitting on my recliner, I'm going to put them on. So
I love it. Yes.
The point is why are we stopping living just because? I don't understand that. I can distinctly remember there was one patient that I had, and she had called me, and I went to her house, and I said, okay, well, what did you want, and we kind of went through her stuff, and we spent one day, and I was kind of like just observing. The next day, I was kind of like taking all my medical information, blah, blah, blah. The third day, I went over, and I was very confused, and the first thing I said right on the get-go when I walked in the door, I says, what do you really want? And she says, I want a heart transplant. So in other words, I said, okay. How in your mind do you foresee that? She says, well, I already checked it out, and there's a doctor from Paris. We live in New Orleans. He's in town next week, and I want to go see him. I'm like, okay, give me his name and phone number, and we did. Called him up in 10 minutes. We were on our way within an hour. We went down to see him, and when we got there, his words were, I hope you enjoy your day. And she looked at him and she said, "Am I dying today?" He says, "Not today, my dear, but I hope you enjoy your day." And I knew exactly what that meant. And what we did was, on the way home, what we did is we took the car, and she had enough oxygen with her, and we drove around to all the places she used to live and all the places she used to rat around in the French Quarter, and all this stuff. And she would say, "Well, that's a stoop I used to sit on," and we would make jokes. I'd say, "Honey, your behind could never fit on that step."
Yeah.
So we would be like talking and laughing, and she was burning through the oxygen like nobody's business. 3 hours later, she went home. Within 2 days, she was in the hospital. And then they said, that she's probably at very few, a few hours she'll be gone. So you take her home.
Mm-hmm.
At 2 a.m, they had a huge party. Her house was filled with her balloons and birthday cake and people and everything. 2 o'clock in the morning, they had a huge birthday party to be able to send her off. And when I think about that, I think how glorious of a story if we could just allow ourselves the ability to say, "Wow, wouldn't that be awesome?" Instead of saying, "Oh, but I have to." Perhaps.
Yeah. I think, what I'm feeling right now is regret for a number of the things that we had gone through with hospice, and how perhaps I could have handled them better. And, being of the baby boomer generation, kind of feeling like, well, I can handle this myself. And, Dean didn't want a funeral. He was very definite with what he didn't want from the doctors. But knowing, that would have been so wonderful. Mm-hmm. But how do you go about planning for that? How can you make it, how can you plan and yet still make it a spontaneous, joyous event when the person that it's affecting is not really aware of what's going on? But everybody else is, and is sending that energy to them. At least I think I have to think of it that way.
But I think also, too, Linda, I think we have to give ourselves a break, and we have to understand that when this occurs, when these events happen, everybody's own fears is what they're playing out. They're not playing out the story for the loved one. They're playing out their own. That's what they're doing. It has nothing to do with the other person. It's sort of like when a patient goes into the hospital, and then all of a sudden someone will come in and say, "Well, why aren't you doing this, and why aren't you doing that?" It's because they themselves fear they won't be saved.
Yeah.
It's their own fears. So I think the idea is that you find someone, you find an advocate, you find someone outside of the family, you find someone different, you find someone perhaps like you or I that will say, "Oh, what if we try this?" Or, what, it's so exciting. What if? When my patient was in the hospital, she says, "You know what I really want?" I said, "Yeah, I know, donuts and tomatoes." And I brought her donuts and tomatoes, and it's just, the idea is that, can we be a little bit freer with the position of exiting this world?
Yeah.
But I think it's also, too, we have to really understand this. I think this is so vitally important. If you were born in the years 40s, 50s, and 60s, there is a 100% chance that you have a way and a perception and a template within your mind of how you're going to exit this world. You're going to have an obituary. You're going to have a funeral. You're going to have this, that, the other. Your insurance is going to pay for things. Your doctor's going to save you. Your priest is going to be there all the time. They're going to have a homily mass for you when you leave, because that's how we grew up. That's how we grew up. Mm-hmm. And when we understand that, we can either honor that, we can change it, or we could say, this is what it is. So just as you shared about your regrets, I think a lot of people have regrets. I'd say 100% of people have regrets, you know, because they got stuck between the stories of how they grew up, how things played out, and how they might have liked to have it differently, perhaps?
Yes, and I think because of those years, the 40s, 50s, and 60s, I think as women, as women trying to reclaim ourselves as vital individuals, we want to get rid of some of that baggage that came along with us. Mm-hmm. That's why I say I'm trying to rehabilitate the word crone, because crone is really the wise, elder, experienced woman who has gifts to share, and we need to listen. And those of us who are crones have our work cut out for us. There is still stuff that we can do. But yeah, and you also have to feel yourself for incredible insensitivity. Like the one doctor who said to me, if you don't convince your husband to do dialysis starting tomorrow, you are just as soon as murdering him. I was like, I was stunned. I didn't know what to say, besides a few, as Dean would put it, sailor words that he knew.
Right.
You don't do that. You don't do that. And I think that also makes end of life harder to deal with, where, Dean was adamant about not wanting dialysis because he had never seen anyone who he knew who had done it who had a better quality of life as a result of it. They were miserable. He said, I don't want it. And I said,
right,
that's okay with me. I will honor your wishes. Whatever they are, you can count on me. And, trouble with the dialysis, he had a mass on his kidney. They wanted to do chemo. And he said, no. He had, we were already past our 6 months, and he wasn't about to give up any time that he might have to something that wasn't going to make things better.
Right. And I think that's also, too, the fear of watching someone be in pain or suffering.
Yeah.
That is so difficult. And I think this is the biggest thing that so many of my patients struggle with, is someone will say, I want to die at home, but yet the person that has to witness it, that's just, many times is just, they don't know what they've bitten off to be able to walk through. They truly do not. And I think sometimes we have to say, I understand that's what you wish, but I cannot be your advocate or your observer at that time. And is it okay if we appoint someone and I will still be here? Because that is a very difficult thing. And so many times people will say, but that's what they want. And gosh, it's just, it is very, very difficult.
Yeah. Well, Dean wanted that. And he, after about 20 months or so, and of course it's all during the pandemic, so, we're really kind of hamstringed by where we can go. He was getting more and more forgetful, napping a lot, not really clear on things, and he'd had a fall. And the next day our nurse came, and she asked him a couple of basic questions, and he was just sitting there like he was in another world. And she said, Dean, there's a bed for you at the respite house on Thursday. This was Tuesday. He said, I think it's time for you and Linda to go there. I said, I know you wanted to die at home, but Linda's having trouble lifting you up and doing some of those things, and you probably don't want her doing that. You want her just sitting there talking to you, laughing and listening to music. And he nodded his head like that was a good idea, but boy, Thursday morning he was not at all pleased to be headed to respite house and not be able to stay at home. Right. But I could not have done it. I could not have done it. Physically, I didn't have the strength. Mentally and emotionally, I was just a mess. I had developed AFib as a result of it, that broken heart syndrome, and all I knew was that he was leaving me, and leaving me way too soon. But I was happy to do it until it became not viable. Right. And it was the hospice nurse who said, do you want your wife exhausted, trying to get everything done for you, or do you want to turn that over to someone else and you and your wife can just sit and hold hands?
Mm-hmm.
And
that is the most
nodded.
important gift I think anybody can ever give anyone, is to understand who can help carry the load. Yet 99% of the people will not allow that because of their own stories, their own fears, and their own insecurities, like we said in the beginning of this call.
Yeah.
You know, is that's exactly it, is what happens, is when we're talking about it, is what happens when the load gets too heavy. You know, and I think the idea is that if we could take away the word regrets, shame, or guilt and say, it is not, it is a gift. What is a gift?
Yes.
That you wish to leave behind. And the gift you leave behind is that you exit this world with the greatest of ease for all involved and yourself too.
Yeah, and his exit was not easy. I mean, but there was one really amazingly beautiful gift at the end. I had gone home to take care of some stuff and came back the next day with a friend from the apartment. And she had said, do you think Dean would mind if I sang to him? I said, no, he'd love it. So she came in, and she has this beautiful soprano, nice, clear a cappella spiritual that she sang. And Dean had been pretty unconscious and unresponsive for the last 2 or 3 days. He was laser focused on her. And they had eye contact, and it was like you knew there were messages going back and forth between the two of them. Right. And it was so beautiful to witness. And, you know, she left, and then he kind of, we got a kiss, and he fell asleep, and 11 hours later he had passed. And I'm comforted by knowing that the last conscious memory he probably had was that of music. But then the last 3 or 4 hours, he was panting so, like it was running 2 marathons at the same time. And his forehead was burning up. And it's like, honey, it's okay. You know, just let go. It's okay. But like I said, by stubborn Yankee, he was going to go right to the very, very last minute. And the nurse who came in and called time of death and stuff said, I said, oh, I had dozed off. I wasn't there for his last few minutes. And she said, that's how he wanted it. And that was really comforting to know that maybe he did take the advice and decided that it was okay.
But also, too, I think I wanted to talk about this for Linda, is that when you had given him that kiss at that time, that was when his spirit leaves. It just took a little bit longer for his body to catch up and dissolve. And I think so many people will not understand that. They think that it's their last breath at which they're gone. It's the last breath that the physical body takes. The spirit may leave and the soul may leave. It leaves in progression, steps. It leaves as it's drifting off, you know, walking into the sunset kind of thing. And when we can consciously say, oh, that's awesome, and that's okay, then they understand that that's the physical body's mechanism turning down. It's sort of like it's the car running out of the gas on the highway kind of idea. And if we can understand that and just take that picture in our mind, we don't get stuck with the grief of the aftermath that their soul and their spirit felt this horrible thing all the way to the end. No, their soul and their spirit was already walking home. That was the vehicle running out of gas. And what a beautiful picture of a gift if we could just hold that moment.
Yeah, and the nurse had said, you know, take as much time as you need with him, and then we'll come in and get him cleaned up. And I just remember holding on to him and sobbing. And then the little voice that has always been there from my mother said, get over it. They've got work to do. Move away, have them come in, have them do what they need to do. And so that's what I did. And then like 2 or 3 days later, I was just enraged with the thought that I could have stayed longer. And that the history, the baggage that we carry was not letting me. And
but perhaps maybe you just didn't have the knowledge of that that his soul and spirit had already left, and that was just a vehicle. Do you see?
Yeah, I think so, because I find that very comforting as you're talking about it, knowing the impact that the music had on him.
Correct.
And
it opened the door.
I had his artwork, our artwork around him, so that was always there when he was conscious to be able to look at. But yeah, I hadn't really thought of it that way, and that is very comforting.
Yeah, because I think a lot of times these connections, when I'm with them at that time, I could just hold them, you could just hold their hand, or you could just be with them in spirit, or you could just be thinking of them in a story or whatever it might be. And all of a sudden you're just opening the door. It's what we do as, the work that I do. I just open the door. And when I open the door, the light starts to shine. And you start to see glitter sparkling all over. That's how I see a soul when it starts to move through the face. And when I think of it that way, I say, that's so awesome. And it's net, you don't see the body. You don't think of it the other blah, blah, blah story. It just doesn't even resonate anymore because it isn't the person. It never was.
Yeah.
It's just a bodily process. I think in closing, if we could just say, it is a bodily process of this human story. My soul and spirit is eternal. Then you can always think about their energy being all around.
Yes, and that's what we had talked about, is this, hey, it's science. Energy doesn't just disappear. It transmutes into something else. And there are times like, and it was 2 nights ago, it's all this creaking going on from the front door of the apartment through the kitchen, and I was hearing rattling, and it was freaking me out. And I thought, nope, Dean is here, checking to make sure that everything is closed up and secure, just like he always did. So I said, your energy is always going to be around. You're always going to know where to find me. And there are times when I just look up and laugh and said, did you see that? Yeah.
Right. See, and that's when the story is able to dissolve, and you don't even think about the other stuff, because the other stuff was merely just an experience, right?
But that's a beautiful thing for people who are going through this, to understand that that last few minutes or whatever it is, that there's a reason why that's happening, and there's a reason why you should take joy in it. Right.
Even with dementia and Alzheimer's, their spirit and their sense of who they are, I always liken it to, I always share with patients, I say, there's a little tiny guardian angel on their shoulder. That's their spirit and their soul, and it's sitting over there waiting for them, for their body to say, I'm done. So in other words, they're kind of outside of their body already. But when you look at them, how sometimes you always look and you say their eyes are empty, or they seem like they're vacant? It's because the soul and the spirit's on their shoulder. It has exited the body. It's just taking the body longer to be able to run out of gas, so to speak. So I think when we think about that, we say, oh, that's awesome. It makes the times in which we are alive to reduce the fear, the expectations, or all of the executive planning, to just say, I don't need that anymore. I know it's going to be okay. I'm just going to run out of gas, or I'm just going to walk into the sunset, and isn't that great? Maybe?
Yeah. Oh, this has been amazing. I feel like I just had a really fabulous doctor session, and I hit on some of those points in the book, but there's a lot more fodder for the direction I'm going next, with just the idea of advocacy and choices and what it all can mean. So there's more in the works.
Very good. Linda, can you share with the listeners how to find out more information about your work?
Okay. The book is called The Perks of Hospice, Stories of Love, Life, and Loss. And a lot of people say, well, that's an intriguing title, Perks of Hospice.
Right.
And if you remember the story in there, that when we first went into hospice and all the wonderful things that started happening to us with free weekly dinners and, our own spiritual caregiver, there were a lot of things to be thankful for at the very beginning and continue to be thankful for throughout. The book's available at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, can be ordered by your local bookstore. And let's see. If you want to find more of the writings along these lines, I've been writing a lot about grief lately. I have a Substack that's called Crones Who Care, Crone with a C. And lindamoran.org is my website. And everything is a work in progress, just like I still am. But it's been a lot of fun.
Well, very good. Well, Linda, it was such a pleasure to have you with us here today. Perhaps in the future you'll come on and we'll have this conversation again, and we'll be in another space and time, and we'll be able to share some more inspiration and tips for those in the process.
I'd love that. I mean, I think this has been probably more beneficial to me than to many of your listeners, and for that I'm really grateful. But I'd be happy to come back. It's once I started the book and it was actually becoming a book, and then talking about it over the last couple of months, there's a new passion there for helping people in this way. So it's been good.
Very
and
good.
I thank you so very, very much for all the advice and ideas.
Oh, very good. Linda, it's such a pleasure to have you. We thank you so much. If you'd like to find out more information about Linda Moran, again, the book is The Perks of Hospice, Stories of Love, Life, and Loss. Please do click on the link on the bottom of the show page to be able to go to her link for more information. And it is about being able to say, how would I like to reframe a different story? I'm ready to shake things off. I'm ready to shimmy myself into a new life. Perhaps maybe it's into my next life. Isn't that awesome? What can we leave behind? What can we gift forward? And how can we go through this experience? And definitely, even for myself, my next time, my next breath into my next life, I already have it all pictured. I'm just going to walk into the forest, a fairy on each side of me, and drift into the sunset. And isn't that wonderful and glorious? No matter how I exit this body, that's how my soul and my spirit will dance into the sunset. So thank you so much for joining us today. This is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher, and until tomorrow, have a great day.
Today we discussed many life-changing concepts. Who do you turn to, and how do you know what is best when faced with a health crisis? Dr. Jeanette is a patient advocate. She listens to the patient, the doctors, and the family, clarifies the health issues and concerns, then helps the patient make the best choices going forward. If you would like help implementing change into your life and health, we can talk and see where you are stuck and how to improve the quality of your life. Check the link on the bottom of today's show page or visit drjeanettegallagher.com to schedule a phone appointment today.